Okay, so we will also wait for the participants to come in. They're all logging in at this point of time. So good evening and a very warm welcome from the Bangalore Schools Group and to the Bangalore Schools Bangalore Education Online Expo. This is possibly the first ever online expo related to education, that too being conducted by a parent group. So, as some of you know, Bangalore Schools Group is an 8-year-old group on Facebook that was started by Shweta Sharan in 2012. We just crossed 50,000 members. One of the most active Facebook group with almost 83% active members, and almost 86% of them are in the parent age group of 25 to 45. This is the second expo that we are conducting, and I am joined by my co-admin and fellow director, Sandhya Vishwan. Sandhya is a educator. She has been an educator for the last 20 plus years, and she focuses on early childhood. She is the director of Matpai Education and also the director of Bangalore Schools Education Initiatives, as well as the Bangalore Schools Group. Sandhya is extremely passionate about children and works very closely with parents and in identifying, helping children to identify schools and work together with them. She does these amazing counseling sessions with parents where she works with them in identifying the strength of a child and then recommending what is the right approach to go for the child. She is also a homeschooling parent and has been homeschooling and unschooling both her children for more than a decade plus now. So, presenting Sandhya Vishwan, who will be moderating this discussion with us. Um, I come to our next panelist. He teaches in the School of Education at the Azim Premji University. He is also the lead for Hub of Education Law and Policy located in the university. His research interests are in the domain of educational policies, assessments, and teacher education. Having completed his schooling and undergraduation in Bangalore, he went to Jawaharlal Nehru University for his higher education and specialized in ancient Indian history. He currently teaches in the master's program in Azim Premji University. The courses he offers for students in MA education program are related to the history of education and educational assessments. Prior to his present role in the university, he has been an educational researcher for over 2 decades, of which he spent more than a decade with Azim Premji Foundation, which allowed him to engage with the education bureaucracy as well as teachers from across over a dozen states in India. Over the last couple of years, education policy related issues has formed the core of Rishikesh's work. He is on various government advisory commissions on issues concerning education, particularly in his state of Karnataka, presenting our second panelist from Azim Premji University, Rishikesh.
Thank you.
Um, our third panelist, we all grew up with the company that he runs. In his own words, Mr. Vishwanath is an educator, musician, and entrepreneur. He is the co-founder of one of India's most loved children's entities, Karadi Tales. He is a co-founder, director, and CEO of Karadi Path Education Private Limited, which specializes in pedagogy of language acquisition. Co-inventor of the unique Karadi Path methodology, which is probably the world's only 100% derivative formal learning process that delivers language proficiency without teaching a single word, meanings, or grammar. The Karadi Path approach has been proven to be 11 times more impactful than conventional language teaching processes. Today, over 3,000 schools use Karadi Path for English language learning. Of these, 2,500 are government and tribal schools, which impact over 500,000 children. He is also the director pedagogy at Isha Vidya Rural Schools. His areas of expertise include children's content, school education, language, learning, and music. Introducing Mr. CP Vishwanath, the CEO of Karadi Path, as our second panelist. Over to you, Sandhya, for this amazing learning experience on NEP and what it means to your child. Over to you, Sandhya.
Thank you, Manoj. Okay, so NAP has been a very hotly debated and discussed topic for the last few months already. Parents are worried what's going to happen. Are schools going to change? There's a lot of questions and doubts that are in parents' mind. So at first, like Rishikesh, having been on that committee, if you could just give us a gist on what parents need to understand about the NEP. It's a large policy. It was squeezed, yet it is a large policy. Can you just give us a gist on what parents need to know?
Yeah, thanks, Sandhya. Well, just a quick correction that I was not on the committee. I was supporting Dr. Kasturirangan's committee, which, of course, presented the draft report, which has now become the policy today.
Okay, I apologize.
Yeah, thanks. So in terms of what we have today in front of us, we should all be clear that it is a policy, right? And it is not a legal document. You cannot hold anybody accountable. You cannot take anyone to a court of law for having not implemented a particular provision in there. So so that's something that we need to understand, and particularly in this era when everything gets accentuated, and with the media trying to amplify everything 1,000 times over, people suddenly wonder whether tomorrow is going to be a very different day for my child or for the school. We should hence be very clearly aware that this is a policy document, and like all policy documents, it is a guiding document which the government has accepted now, and says that they would like the education to move in the direction that this policy wants to take education. Yeah, so once we are aware of that, then I think even those anxieties which unnecessarily are probably surrounding many aspects of the provision, we can put to rest. And then when you look at the policy, when you read through the policy, of course, very clearly you see that it has almost a 15-year implementation time frame, right? So what the government is saying is that, well, there were a group of experts, that is the Dr. K. Kasturirangan committee, who gave us certain ideas in terms of how our country should move towards making education better, and which would be then something that our children would be able to make use of in this 21st century. And having accepted that, then they went about thinking through as to how it could be done. And then when we had the final policy, they also went with the Kasturirangan committee's recommendation that this can't be an overnight change. So two things there. Why can't it be an overnight change? Because what the policy is saying is that many things have to change. We have to change the way we are doing education, from bottom up. And so for that to change in that manner, a lot of things have to fall into place, and that cannot happen overnight. So hence the policy talks about implementation time frame about 15 years, and then says, in about 20 years time, the policy also would have run for a few years, and probably it would be time for a review of this policy and come up with the next policy. So I will probably stop here, having said that, and maybe we could get into some of the specifics later. Yeah. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Rishikesh. You've put, I think, a lot of parents' mind to rest regarding that it is just a policy yet, and the implementation will take time, and it will go in phases or stages, if at all it does get implemented. And I think many, from going by the group that we are at, I have realized that many parents of older children are waiting for the government to come back on what they want to do. However, there is still a lot of confusion in the early years, because the main thing that has caught on to everybody, be it as a school owner or as a parent, is the 5-year as stage 1 that is being looked at. And there's still a concern on whether should we go for a full-fledged school or a preschool like we had the choice earlier. Is it going to be phased? Because there's also mention in the policy that the foundation for literacy and numeracy needs to be set at that age. So I know, Mr. Vishwanath, you've been doing a lot of work in the rural segment especially, and Karadi Tales being a big support and resource for language acquisition. So can you just give us first your experience on it and what your thoughts are about how the policy as a guideline and that details or your program that you are running has been able to put through and integrate these guidelines.
Thank you very much, Sandhya. I think first of all, it's too early for us to look at the aspects of integration because as Rishikesh said, the states which have a huge say in terms of how this whole thing unfolds will have their own ideas. What the NEP is a vision document that basically one aspires towards. And the good thing, as a footnote to the policy is the fact that soon after the NEP policy, there is also a reasonable document which says that how are we going to go about, not only, making these policies actually happen on the ground, how are we going to actually debate on specific matters. So I think that document to me is slightly more hopeful that because previous NEPs really never, went too far. But coming specifically to ECC, the early childhood education, I would say that both from whether it's a privileged or the underprivileged background, one thing which is universal is the fact that most of us, and you being also very closely involved with early education, we see the fact that 0 to 8 years is a much more, let us say, better block than a 0 to 5 years, because you do realize that children are very, very different at these points, even in terms of what we call basic milestones. So this idea, from a pediatric standpoint, which comes about learning milestones, by 4 you must be able to do this, by 5, whether it is motor skills or whether it is, the intellectual aspects of learning, you realize that children are very, very different in terms of how they negotiate the pathway. And a certain level, I hate to use this word, but a certain level of homogeneity, starts emerging around 8 and 10. But when you start forcing homogeneity at the age of 5, you destroy a lot of possibility. And so I am very, very happy about this new block because this is not a new idea. From a neuroscience perspective, it has always been the fact that there can be difference in terms of whether it is 0 to 8 or 0 to 10. But largely people have said that this is not the space for you to actually assess, for you to actually have milestones, for you to pinpoint that at this point of time you must have done this or done that. At a broad health level, or there are some guidances that you have, but they are not hard-coded, numbers where you say that, oh my God, my child is 3 not talking. Now, you obviously are going to evaluate whether there is a physiological problem. But if you don't see a physiological problem, the doctor is going to tell you, be patient. It'll emerge, because different children actually, do it very, very differently. And that doesn't mean that at the age of 5, he or she is not speaking at the same level as somebody else who started speaking at 1. So these competencies, basically, we really don't understand how the brain works because something very, very fantastic and fabulous is happening in there. So the block of 5, which is, once you are out of the home, 3 to 8 being the foundational block. And there are a few other conversations that have come out which said, this is also a block where you don't want to assess. This is also a block about, what are the things that you actually want to do, in this, during this particular phase. Then when we look at it from the point of view of the larger Indian population, the thing is that I like personally, because Isha Vidya being extremely deep rural in terms of our schools, we also realize that, as much as one would like to romanticize rural life in the sense of, how the child learns from nature and how the child all of these things are happening. But the fact of the matter is that it is not really a very rich atmosphere anymore, the way that it used to be. A village is not the kind of space that it used to be. Both the parents are out doing something or the other. And there is the only input that you have is nutrition, that the family kind of takes care of the nutrition. From an intellectual development or from a learning standpoint, the resources are very limited. The time is very limited in most of these households. So to bring pre-kindergarten as a formal, stage, even for a child from the who would typically go to a government school, I think is a good idea. But this will be very, very debated, because should I be in the home or should I be in the school? At what age should I actually leave the home? These are debates that will continue to be there, and I only hold the opinion that currently the rural home is also unable to support the child adequately from a learning perspective, and hence, if we are able to structure a good learning environment and not make this a part of the thing that they have not clarified yet, is I would have loved to see the Women and Child Welfare Department not have the responsibility, and only the Education Department have the responsibility as far as education is concerned, and as far as nutrition and health is concerned, leave it to that department. Because I think Rishikesh would bear me out that departments don't work very easily with each other. Even within the department, the work is difficult. But then when you have budgets here, budgets there, some allocation here, some allocation there. So that I hope that, over a period of time, as people debate about it, when it actually gets, becomes more practical, that you would not just say that, somebody who, the name Anganwadi teachers, that is a label that is applied by several government, an Anganwadi helper, Anganwadi teacher. The difference between them is almost non-existent, in practice. And they do use their common sense, they do use their life experience, they do do the best that they can possibly do. But there isn't the kind of resources that have been given to them in terms of training, in terms of materials or tools or whatever, in order to be able to use these as well. So I am extremely, extremely happy about the fact that, this block has been created, and that, there's specific reference to the learning process in the Anganwadis and the need to actually make it much, much more robust.
Okay. Being an early years educator, I totally agree with you, Mr. Vishwanath, on the milestones and generally putting them in groups of ages of 2 and 3. We cannot expect. Even a month makes a lot of difference. As I say, there's always a range, even pedagogically, physiology-wise. There is a range that is said. You don't say a child is speaking at 2, my neighbor's child is speaking much more in sentences, and you can't compare them. But for us, we see 0 to 6 as an age, when from 6 you can start getting them to slowly build on that. Now that you mentioned about the stage, the last webinar that we had with Rishikesh, you did mention that there was something similar in Karnataka already up to grade 3, the Nallikali. Can you just give us a little brief on that and how that works?
Right. So the Karnataka government schools are on this pedagogic approach called Nallikali. It's a multi-grade, multi-level learning environment. So those of you who've been into a government school classroom of the early years, that is the early grades, primary, lower primary grades, you will see that there are children who are together, and they are across these 3 grades. And so it is a model that was there in Rishi Valley. Most of us would be aware of Rishi Valley, and Rishi Valley was also piloting it in the government schools around as part of the river project. And so there were a group of educators from Karnataka, from the government, who went there, who immersed themselves in Rishi Valley, what was happening, and brought it back here, and took it to one of our most disadvantaged tribal district, the HT Kote area. And that is where they implemented it in the mid-90s. So once they saw as to what was happening, and the pedagogic approach, which Mr. Vishwanathan would be able to explain probably more, given the close work that they do in the tribal areas, wherein again, it's all about a lot of stories, and along with all that, getting children at their own pace to reach some of these milestones, some of these learning milestones. So this is an approach wherein there are different steps and different ladders, and so children in their own pace continue moving around it. And there are a few groups, 5 groups to be precise, and in each group there are certain things happening. Now in each of these groups there could be a child from grade 1, 2 or 3. So for instance, there's an assessment group. So they would come there and they would do self-assessment of what they have learned to their targets, the learning targets. And so it would be grades 1, 2, or 3 who would be there doing their own self-assessment. And then there is a peer assessment group wherein children assess each other. Then there is a teacher support group. So this is the Nalikali in a nutshell, right? And so this is something that is already there in the Karnataka schools. So in some sense, when policy is saying that we need to look at this block of 5 years as the foundational stage, where there is no strict silos, right? And there is not necessarily a year-to-year movement of children, but then based on their own self-paced learning. So Karnataka's experiment suits quite well to this idea, right? And more importantly is in terms of the pedagogic approach that happens at this stage. And as Mr. Vishwanath was saying, right, it's so for instance, many people have misunderstood this provision of introduce as many languages as possible in these early years, right? Now, people who think about language in this very traditional, formal, structured manner find it, absolutely ridiculous. But people who know as to how languages have to be introduced and what Karadi Tales has done, and that way obviously the more the language, the richer the environment and the more enjoyment that children would have. But then, I mean, do we have the resources in terms of the human resources? I'm saying not just the material resources. Do we have it with us? And our current pre-primary structure primarily is the Anganwadi space, as Mr. Vishwanathan spoke of. It's Anganwadi teachers. With all genuine, motivation, they could be there, but then they have a certain limitation in terms of how they would be able to take this pedagogic approach, right? So those are some concerns, and that's the reason why, in fact, the policy says certain things and says that this is how it ought to be done and doesn't really mandate anything. So if, for instance, we in an environment in a state or let's say an NGO working somewhere can do this, and that would be a very beautiful role model for the rest of that state, or even to take it outside to the rest of the country. So yeah, so Karnataka, I think, and this activity-based learning at a multi-grade, multi-level, in a framework is there across many states. Right? They call it different, but Karnataka is one state which expanded it across all its schools about 10 years ago. Tamil Nadu has it, Andhra has it, and a few North Indian states also have it. But then I think some states have kind of given up. There's a lot of opposition, by the way, for this approach because the society doesn't really see it as education, and particularly because when you see the factory-based models which the middle class send their children to, people in fact wonder as to why is it that their children are into this kind of an environment when the rest are all belted up and suited up and sitting with their fingers on the lip, right? So though this is a far better way of a child getting educated or being in school, they see this not as schooling. So there is a lot of opposition, pushback from parents saying that this is not what we want. There are many teachers, because the teachers require a lot of teachers are also very active in the Nalikali class, so they're moving about from one group to another. So there are some teachers who don't like this. I mean, they prefer being there at the board with the chalk, and only talk. So there is a lot of pushback in many states. States have fallen prey to that, and to those lobbies. But thankfully, some states like Karnataka being one have held on to this pedagogic approach. It requires refinement. Now it's almost a 25-year-old model. There's not too much of revision that has happened. There is a lot more learning, and I'm sure from people like Mr. Vishwanath and many others who are working in the early years, there is a lot that can come into some of these models. But yes, I think in some places we are in a good state to bring in some of those provisions for the early years that the policy is talking about.
Okay, thank you for that perspective, Rishikesh. I'd like to add on, because I've been working with children and language acquisition. Yes, conventionally, everybody starts with the reading and writing, and that is where we have the block, because language acquisition comes from having the language around you. And that's what, a lot of us educators also believe. I've had 3-year-olds come to me for the first time in school, proficient in 3 languages with no mixing up. Parents bilingual, they have a nanny speaking another language, and they're very clear because there's only communication that is happening around them, and there is no reading and writing and focusing on the grammar part of it. Now, I think, as the policy says, if we can move away from the conventional way that, and you just said that you've been seeing that difference when the language is approached in that way, it helps the child a lot more. Yes, many parents have misunderstood it because of the conventional way of teaching a language. And in this regard, Karadi Tales has been, one of the popular companies that I have heard of, Karadi Tales, which brings in music and so many aspects and the culture. That was what, as a parent, drew me first to the Karadi Tales. And now that you work with especially in the rural areas, I would like to focus on Mr. Vishwanath, on how that program also runs, just like Rishikesh was giving us an idea on how Nalikali goes. I'd like to understand how you work, because in the urban area, in this aspect, I do find there's a lot more parental support. But how does your program, work in the rural setting? I'd like to understand a little more about that.
Yeah, thank you. The process basically, once again, is universal in the sense that there's no differentiation whether you are a rural child or an urban child, because the inspiration for Karadi Path really came from Dharavi in Mumbai, because there was this NGO who was using Karadi Tales to teach English to the, after school. There were home schools. The groups of children would come to a certain point inside Dharavi, and there would be a teacher who would take them through things. And then at some point in time, this was in 2000 or so, that somebody wrote to us saying that, with Karadi Tales, such fantastic work is happening. Please come, take a look at what's happening with our children, with English. We went there, and we observed the class. We observed that they were really listening to the story, enjoying the songs, and having a great level of engagement. And at the end of the class, when the teacher asked questions in Marathi or Hindi, saying what happened in the story, who was this, what did you like, what did you not like, the children were able to respond. Now, the teacher's assumption was that the children were actually engaging with English. But being a little bit more perceptive ourselves, we realized that they had engaged with all the non-verbal cues that they got. But then for them, the language was non-existent, so they didn't take in a single word of English in that particular process. But over a period of time, possibly if this listening environment continued, the language would unravel. But I don't think that opportunity would exist in a space like Dharavi, because this child has to go back to that school and then learn English the way that it is taught inside that whichever school that there is. But our learning was, every one of these children in Dharavi spoke 3 languages. If they came from Orissa, they are speaking Oriya, they are speaking Hindi, they are speaking Marathi. If they are in a Gujarati section of Dharavi, they are speaking Gujarati. If they are in the Tamil section of Dharavi, they are speaking Tamil. And these are not native Tamil speaking children. It's simply the fact that, the family has moved there, the parents have gone to work. Now there are some 3, 4, 5-year-olds who need to play with each other, and they need to communicate with each other. They figure it out. And then they are having a good time. And in the process, they have exchanged so much of language between themselves. And then, it kind of brought us back to the something that was always staring at us. I mean, it's like an elephant in the room that says that all of us in India speak 3 languages, 4 languages. It is not some kind of an achievement. I mean, we don't consider, being bilingual as, a star on our head. And then if you are trilingual or, you speak 4 languages. And my own upbringing being in Mumbai, with Palakkad as the native place, Tamil as the mother tongue, Marathi, Hindi, English happening. At the age of 4 and 5, we were speaking 5 languages without any problem. So these epiphanies, to a certain extent, actually drove us very hard into saying, what nonsense are we doing? I mean, instead of learning from India about language learning, we are kind of bringing ideas from monolingual societies and saying, okay, this is how language must be taught. Now, the ecosystem is completely different. But I actually stood in London and I told them that in a few years from now, the whole world will be learning English from India and not from the Americans or the British, simply because of the fact that, we know this phenomenon very well. And then it took us about a 10-year time frame where we started observing this more from a pedagogical standpoint, from a neuroscience standpoint, and saying that what are those elements? And that is how we came up with the fact that every time I look at the unit of the language as the word, I seriously impair language learning. Every time I teach the meaning of a word, I seriously impair comprehension. So you have to come from the big picture to the small picture, the way that it happens, and there should be no teaching. Everything should be prediction and discovery, prediction and discovery. You create the ecosystem for that, which does require a lot of tools. And then it required a journey of, and that's a journey that's still continuing. We are learning this process in terms of how to implement it. The fundamentals, I would argue with any linguist in Harvard or MIT, and I've had opportunities to do this, and I will debunk the complete theory of saying that you really need to teach zero. The moment you get into your head that you're going to teach language, you are impairing the process. So in a conventional school, obviously we don't have the luxury. So Karadi path will take you 4 steps forward. The English classroom will take you 3 steps backward, but it's still 1 step forward. So you're saying, okay, that is the reality of the world that we live in. So this happens in, let us say, so-called, let us say, a number 1 school in India, in Mumbai, an ICSE school, where they use it to accelerate the language process. Because we are also underachieving by virtue of not offering the child the richest possible language experience at 2 and 3. This child is capable, the life experience may be limited, but the learning capacity is not limited. So hence, anything that I make the exposure rich, I make the experience rich, the only thing that I should not do is have expectations. Because different children will take different parts of what I'm giving. It is not mandatory that because I gave you this exposure, I need you to show the fact that you learn something from it. That is the thing that you want to take out of the equation and say, during this time, as an adult, as an educator, whether I'm a parent or whether I'm an educator, my responsibility is how rich an environment can I actually create and offer you from the point of view, specifically from the point of view of language, which is learned intuitively. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. You cannot teach. The more that a parent stands behind and said, look straight, hold the handle, balance, even the parent does not know what balance means. How am I supposed to balance? So the less you talk and the more you just say, I'm here for you, don't worry, just go ahead. The child will learn faster than somebody who's a chatty, friend or a chatty parent behind, trying to guide you in terms of the process of learning to ride the cycle. And this is not said only in amusement. This is said very, very seriously, that every time that you try to teach, you slow the process down. And we say this because we now have 20 years of experience. We now have this experience in every demographic possible. And 1.2 million children at last count was who have learned English via this. But this is a language learning pedagogy. It's not an English learning pedagogy. It is agnostic to which language. So we are developing the product for Hindi. We are developing the product for Sanskrit at this point in time. The toolkit needs to be prepared because each language, once again, you must understand the uniqueness of the idiom, syntax, etc., etc. And then, so you do need a certain amount of expertise in that specific language. And then you need the pedagogical framework, and then you need the tools. So it is, each language will be a 4 to 5 year developmental process, despite the large repository of content that we already have. It still will take, it's a continuing process. And I'm pretty certain that recently during an NEP webinar, somebody was asking me as to why is this pedagogy not part of NCERT? I said, it will be part of NCERT. 10,000 schools, once we cross, nobody can ignore us. Because the great level impact that you're making, especially in a government school or in a tribal school, is the fact that a 3rd standard child who has had 48 hours of Karadi path is better than the 8th standard child in that school. on any agnostic language test, this child is better. That's not some miracle. The 8th standard child is still, pretty close to zero. They know how to read and write, but they really don't know the language. They know how to take the test. They really don't know the language. I'm talking about English. When it comes to the Indian languages, once again, we have this unique challenge when it comes to languages is the fact that the gap between formal and informal language in most Indian languages is much more substantial than that in English. So you will find a Tamil speaking child struggling with Tamil in school. You will find a Kannada speaking child struggling with Kannada in the school, not just with reading and writing, even with understanding, even with comprehension, the child will struggle. So you also need to take these nuances into account and say, how am I going to actually segue from the platform into the next space? So however strong your platform, Karadipa typically builds on it. So it doesn't matter whether you come from an English speaking house, I can take you forward. So the thing is, you already have an ecosystem. I will build on the ecosystem. If you don't have an ecosystem, we will build the ecosystem from the ground up. It's simply I think that is the way all of us learned our languages. As I said, in addition to the 5 languages that I was comfortable with, French was the other language that I learned in school for 5 years. Very, very good teachers. I worked hard. I got 99 on 100. I can't speak 5 sentences of French. So that is how deceptive the assessment process can be. I can beat it 100 times over.
Thank you. And you made a very interesting point about the language. I was raised outside the country. I can speak Malayalam, which is my mother tongue, and I can read and write as well because my parents made that effort. It was after that I do not know the grammar because I've never learned it as a subject at school. I don't understand the literature. I do understand because I'm interested in the literature, but the kind of appreciation that I can have for my language, I don't have for my mother tongue, but I have it for English, which is the language that I think with.
Yeah.
But that was only because my parents made an effort to give us the platform to speak. I had my other classmates who were not speaking their mother tongue at home, and it was English. Another interesting point that you made just now is about learning happens. You don't have to teach. This is something that I always tell all parents. The moment we set goals for learning, be it language or subjects, you are limiting their learning. You're keeping it in a box and saying this is what you need to learn, and you are killing the ability of a child to learn from a lot more. The moment I have left a child free, as a homeschooling parent, I had that freedom, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to homeschool. I find that my children were more of sponges about so many other things than I wanted to teach them. It's only now when it comes to the exam time that I'm looking at, okay, how do I help my child to put this in a box and just get that away, because our assessment system happens to be that way. On that note, Rishikesh, I just like to understand, because you've been working with a lot of schools across India, and especially I'd like to see from the government school perspective. English is a language now that everybody understands, that globally, or if even in career you need to come up, English needs to be there. We understand the appreciation of the culture and the language, yet their own language, local languages, yet English seems to be like a must learn subject in school. So in rural areas, is that there in the early years, or are they working at it at a later stage? How
well, I mean, you mean to ask as to how is it in terms of the system? What does it offer?
Yes, is it compulsory? I mean, a lot of fear surrounding in the group is because I know as a policy, when it is made, India is a large country with so much diversity, and policy makers are looking at the larger picture, while here a lot of us in the urban are thinking this is the bubble that we are in, and a little confused. But this I'm asking from an academic point of view to understand, is English as given as much importance in the earlier years, I mean early years and the primary years, at government
Right.
schools as well? And
Yeah.
if so,
So
how do they work on that?
right. So let me just step back and answer something else through some things that I've been reading of late on this whole language issue. I think there has been a lot of again misinterpretation by even people who are writing on the policy. They don't seem to have even read the policy and they're going about writing. I read a fourth-year law student writing in a very reputed magazine that this policy has said that English should not be taught, and what kind of a progressive idea, I mean, what kind of a policy is this? Not progressive, in English is required. Now, if you look at it, one of the things that we will probably see and appreciate in the policy is its flexibility. Almost in everything, there is flexibility. There is nothing mandated. It's always, this is the right, this is the way to go about, this could be more useful, is how the policy puts it. So there is that flexibility. And hence, this whole idea of mother tongue or the home language being the medium is also on the same lines, right? Now, the other thing is English being this aspirational language, and this is something that is across the country, and everybody knows, right? Parents, I mean, though they may not have been to school, they know, they see outside, and they see that there is this opportunity that English brings to everyone. And hence, there has been that, kind of a push from the parent lobbies saying that we want English. And that's one of the reasons why, for instance, many parents have moved their children away into private schools. Though a lot of our studies have shown that these private schools, which compete with the government schools, what we call the low fee paying schools, in terms of standards, they're very, very poor. Many times they're even, worse off than the government schools around. So in spite of that, parents, some are able to get out the money that is required for the fee and put their children in there only because it is being touted as an English medium. Now, there is that confusion, that if I have to learn English, then I have to only do English medium. And which is where that awareness probably, is not as it should be. And because of that, there is this demand for English medium. But most government schools today across the country, many state governments have English introduced in grade 1 itself as a subject, right? So it was up to, in fact, for almost 20 years now, English has been a subject in all government schools across the country from grade 5 usually. But many states moved it to grade 1 when this pressure started building, saying that we want our children to know English. Then it was moved to grade 1. So a lot of the state governments have grade 1. In fact, you will see the grade 1 English textbooks. Now the problem is, one, of course, the material, how they, and as Mr. Vishwanath was saying, was, how is it that it is introduced, right? So even at grade 8, after 8 years of learning the language, and in fact, Mr. Vishwanath was, kind there and, was saying that they may know how to read and write, but even that's a problem in most schools. One, of course, the approach to the material that exists, and 3, the human resource, the teachers, right? I mean, they themselves have come from non-English kind of background. They're pushed into doing English, even they may not be liking to, even teach English. So all these situations are there, which is hence not conducive for introducing a language and getting children to learn it. So that entire thing has to change. And that's what the policy is saying. I mean, the way we do things will have to change. And for that, our mindsets will have to change, right? The teachers will have to think about doing this in a very, very different way. And that is why it is very scary when there are many states which are turning their government schools into English medium, right? Andhra is one of the latest ones that have done that. And Supreme Court has, in fact, given a verdict, I think, last week, that they, because there was a public interest litigation, and Supreme Court has said they can't do it. Anyway, so they're turning schools into English medium when we could not get one teacher to teach English as a subject to our children well. You're converting the entire school into an English medium just because there is that pressure. You ask that question, in the rural areas, what it is like. People want it. And that's the reason why they're moving into the private schools. But then when people want it, I mean, as a government, it's also your duty to inform as to what is it that is best. Yes, we understand that English is an aspirational language, it is required, but then how do we go about doing it? Rather than catapult in this way, saying that, oh, well, you're sending your children off to government, private English medium, here we are going to give you English medium, which is going to completely, collapse our public education system for one sure. And two, that entire, the entire cohort of children who are going to be in these schools are, going to be 8 years, 10 years down the line, coming out of our system completely half baked in everything. I mean, it's not that it's not already happening, but then, there will be no hope. And that's the kind of disaster I foresee. And I'm really, really concerned of this move of, moving into an English medium that is happening. And that is because, again, coming back to your question, there is this demand, even in the rural areas. Parents are aware that there is this language which is very opportunistic. I mean, not opportunistic, which comes with a lot of opportunities, and hence they see that that's one way that they can get out of those vicious cycles in which the entire family has been in. So there is that demand, and the governments have seen that and hence have started offering. There are some governments which have done a good job of it. They have been able to recruit good English teachers from grade 1 onwards, and then they've been able to do a good job. But then even the pool is very small. In fact, Karnataka 4-5 years ago, I think, tried recruiting English teachers. 10,000 teachers, is what the applicants finally, the applications were about that many. But then the government couldn't even find 1,000 good English teachers. Finally, I think about 200, 300 or something like that. I'm not very sure of these numbers, but the numbers that were recruited to the number of applicants that came in, the ratio was abysmally poor. And so we don't even have the pool of English teachers. So hence there is that big task of ensuring that we at least have good English language teachers coming up, coming up from our system. Again, being aware of as to how in different ways that languages can be learned rather than sticking to certain conservative paths. So all this transformation that is required to happen is something that is going to take quite a while, and hopefully into a 4-year B.Ed program. When it's in the universities, we will be able to bring in all this learning from the experiments that Mr. Vishwanathan has done, and all the other early years and other language learning experiments that are happening in our country, rather than bring things from outside. So many different ways in which people have figured out as to how we can equip ourselves with language, and so those things will have to come into our approach. And yes, I mean, if we stick to it, and if we believe that yes, I mean, we can find our own answers here, then we will be able to, in a few years' time, have very good approaches through which probably our children would learn languages very well, including, of course, English.
Okay, that brings it, or kind of boils down to teacher training, actually, I would feel, and the change of mindset on how education should be, not just in languages, in anything else that any subject that they are doing. So when it comes to the teacher training, also I do feel, when we say that a B.Ed, a 4-year B.Ed program, the content of the program, I've been recruiting teachers for my preschools and otherwise wherever I've worked for, and I do not find that mindset, even though the psychology or child development as one of the subjects, I don't see the teachers being able to imbibe the thought process to see a child as an individual and apply what they have learned there. So that also I think is a bigger challenge. Plus the parents wanting something, the demand from the parents for be it a language or a subject, or these are the subjects. As we all know, all our boards have various subjects as choices, and nobody knows that. We all think it's the science and humanities that everybody needs to compulsorily study it, because the demand comes from the parents. In Kerala, I think around 20 years ago, we had the DPEP, which was very similar to what the policy, the guidelines are, and it failed miserably there because the parents thought the children were just climbing trees and running around. So the expectation is very different there as well. Mr. Vishwanath, as you've worked with so many schools across the country, and I am sure your program, when you run it at a certain place, you do expect somebody from there, either the teachers from the school or from the government schools, Anganwadis, to take that forward, right? That support. You physically cannot be at every place at the same time. So what has your experience been, and what are your thoughts on this about how the system is able to support what you are doing, or how you are able to support the system in that, and the resources, the human resources involved in this part, which are already existing and you are trying to build it there?
Right in the beginning, I think while since we had a long period of really thinking and preparing and actually experimenting with, in fact, before the Karadi Path, the company itself was created and the program was launched, we had already had about 200 schools as pilot and close to about 8,000 children through whom we had run our experiments. And one of the things that you realize is the fact that if I am going to expect the teacher to be proficient in the language, this is a non-starter. The only way that this can work is that I use the experience of the teacher, the life experience of the teacher, the teaching experience of the teacher, the common sense that the teacher has, and say that I am going to make you a co-learner. You are going to be student number one. So none of the English does not come from the teacher. The English comes from a whole range of materials and support that they can, whether it is in the text form, whether it's in the audio form, whether it's in the visual form. And so the teacher's English improves dramatically to a point where a teacher who could not speak one sentence of English will give you a 10-minute testimonial on how Karadi Path works at the end of 2 years or 3 years of the program. So this is something that I think in those spaces where we have had continuity for about 3 years, and this is also not an easy thing in a government space, because it's not possible for you to tender for Karadi Path and get the program. Somebody, some bureaucrat out there has to stick their neck out and say, I want this because I have seen it work. So it'll either be a 2-school pilot moving to a 50-school pilot and then moving to a 500 school scale up. So this is the way that the program has somehow or the other managed to come in. In many ways, these are not easy achievements inside the government space, that there was no competitive bidding for this program and the government is paying money for this to actually happen. So the teacher becomes the co-learner, and the necessary ingredient for scaling is the fact that the teacher need not be proficient in the language. The moment you make that a precondition, then you know that you are going to struggle with it. And let's once again not forget that this is not just about English. It is also about the other languages. We struggle to train our Isha Vidya teachers who are Tamil speaking to teach Tamil well. So we have to prepare a whole range of material, give them a lot of training before they can actually teach the Tamil that is there in the textbook correctly. Now,
okay. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a question right here which is connected to what you're saying. So I thought I'll just take that up. And this is regarding Kannada. So parent who is native Hindi speaker, and Kannada starts as compulsory in grade 1. So she's asking, does Karadi Path have something for Kannada? So I just thought I'll take that on because you were speaking about this.
So this is interesting, because what happens in the schools which have been using Karadi Path in English is that this is not something that is exclusive to Karadi, needs to be exclusive to Karadi Path. The teacher who has taught English in this manner starts adapting these same processes to the syllabus material that is there in Tamil or Kannada or whatever. And suddenly they find that in those classes, they are finding better learning outcomes. The teacher is a reasonably intelligent person. Okay. It's not as if, and this does not require you to be a rocket scientist to figure out certain things because the process is very natural. So if I tell a story, if I make a good storyteller out of you, now if I have good models of storytelling in English and I have imbibed it in English, I will do that in Marathi as well. And the moment that and in Karadi Path training, the biggest challenge that we face is telling that if you have to jump up and down like a monkey, you have to do it. If you have to roll on the floor, you have to do it. I'll just show you a picture here. I think the viewers may be interested. So, getting them out of their inhibited spaces in terms of communication and language and storytelling, these competencies itself, as they develop, you find that the moment they start believing in it, they start applying it. See, you have to respect the fact that they also come from a certain space of having been taught certain things. So if I have to believe something else, who are you to come and tell me that what I have been doing for all of these years is wrong? And keep in mind that there are many primary teachers who are 50 and 55-year-old men. Now you are asking that person to roll on the floor. So our trainers have to work seriously hard in getting them to that point, but they work. That's something that we have created an organization that knows, that has slowly learned. I mean, it's not been easy. It's still a struggle every time. First year inside a school means a battle with the teacher, and in terms of saying, "Ye kyun karna hai? Why should I do this? I have taught for so many years. What is this you are asking me to do? Am I being paid extra for doing this?" So all of these questions will actually come up. So with Kannada or with any of the other languages, and as more, let us say, I'm pretty certain that we are not the only people who can do this, and this requires a much larger set of people doing it if it needs to be scaled up. But as the belief grows that this isn't as difficult as it looks, that I can teach 3 languages to a 5-year-old simultaneously without a problem. So this whole, this ghost of what is a medium of instruction, that should also disappear, because if the moment I give you choice, the moment I'm able to actually genuinely enable choice, then it is a question of, which direction do I choose to go? What is my preference? And in the Indian, specifically in the NEP, one of the things that they have shied away from defining properly is they have used these 4 terms, which is regional language, local language, home language, and mother tongue. Now, these 4 are not synonymous terms by a long shot. For a majority of the population, they are not synonymous terms. So how many languages am I? And see, in India, states have always had, if you go to Kuppam, which is in Andhra Pradesh, you will find Tamil medium school, you will find Kannada medium school, you will find Urdu medium schools, you will find Telugu medium schools. But they have been disappearing gradually. Many states had multiple medium schools depending on which district it was or which block it was. So there was this ecosystem across many states in India, especially when you go down from Maharashtra southwards. If you look at the number of mediums that the government used to operate in the last 30-40 years, they operated, in Maharashtra government operated a lot of Tamil medium schools, wherever the Tamil population was there. So these things, unfortunately, because of financial viability or, locating the schools adequately, or because of political reasons or whatever it is, these disappeared. So I think this concern that many parents have about the medium of instruction, especially, let's say, parents who are there on this forum, I think that concern is a non-concern, because you will have the choice. It's not as if it's not a diktat which says that, okay, everybody must learn in Kannada medium or everybody must learn in Tamil medium. It is simply the fact that you must learn in a medium, you must learn in a language that you know and understand well. You can't be learning in English medium, as Rishikesh pointed out, in an affordable private school, where you are taught English medium by a teacher who does not know English. You are taught English medium in a government school in Tamil Nadu, which has English medium sections. The teacher does not know English at all. So the textbook is in English, the class is in Tamil, the exam is in English. I mean, this is ridiculousness at its highest level, and what damage are we doing to our children in the process of doing these things? So fundamentally, if you know how to enable language, then you can talk about the medium of instruction. So for that first step, basically, is the biggest hurdle that, and I think this is not an easy problem to solve. It's going to be this language problem is going to be a very, very complex problem. But hopefully, I think there is, I personally, in my engagements with the government, have been seeing greater and greater openness to innovation, greater and greater openness to doing things that are not prescribed by XYZ, even among the block education officers or whoever, or the entire line of officers. There is a higher level of receptivity to ideas, and I am hoping that continues to If that continues to happen well and grow well, I think we will solve the problem. At the moment, we should not even prescribe what the solution is going to be, but eventually the argument will happen, the debate will happen, and the solution hopefully will emerge. The journey has to continue.
In the forum that we have, what I have understood is in many areas across India, this is not a problem. The language problem is not there. Here in the metros, there's a floating population moving from different parts of India or across the world, and that's where all this apprehension regarding the medium of instruction is coming. So parents are like, okay, my mother tongue is Bengali. Yes, so Mr. Vishwanath.
I want to correct that. In Tuticorin, which is a small town, you have migrant labor. In every little town across, especially the southern states and Maharashtra, you have not an insignificant population of migrant labor. So it is not an easy problem there either.
The concern comes there also when these migrants come to another state. That could also be a lot of reasons, a reason for a lot of students dropping out of school.
Yeah.
Let's say somebody moves from Assam to somewhere in Tamil Nadu. They don't go to school because it is difficult for them, even a government school set up there. Well, here parents are looking at education, and there's been a lot in our group. We've had literally fights over the language, especially when Kannada was made mandatory in schools. And in Bangalore, we've had fights where we had to close the group. It goes to that extent. I understand the concern. I also will have to say it is how the language is approached. I know of private international schools in Bangalore, which have found a solution. Yes, because the government says Kannada is mandatory does not mean that you need to learn to read and write in grade 1 and 2. The intention is to appreciate the language and learn the local language as another language. English is the medium. And these schools, what they have done is they have started with communication classes in Kannada. It is not an assessment. There's no assessment for it. There's no testing for it. Rules are being followed, and the children are learning as well. Parents are happy because it's not a subject that is being assessed. Again, the implementation at schools is where sometimes, NEP again is a policy. However, even if you're going to take those guidelines or suggestions, private schools are not guided on what pedagogy they need to follow. In government schools, probably, there would be some training and some a common factor that goes. While here, that's not the case. And many schools would probably adopt many of these guidelines without, being answerable to anybody and doing a good job of it because of the assessment. Before I come to Rishikesh on that, there's a question in the chat. Being a homeschooling parent also, and many of us moving out of the system because of the assessment, not because of the policy or anybody else changing the rules. We don't like the way that the system is being run. We understand the goal is different by the government. Now, I know it's a policy, but otherwise also, Rishikesh, I'd like to ask how are things for homeschoolers in India in general? How do you think that we do take exams, those who want to, some of us, but how do you think anything will affect, including the NEP, will affect homeschooling families?
Yeah, Sanjay, just before we come to the homeschooling question, on this question of language mandatoriness and the solution that some of the international schools have found. Now, that's the way forward, right? Now, where is this politics? Where is the politics coming from? Why is, for instance, a state like Karnataka mandating, right? Because there is this thing outside that, well, children, even Kannada-speaking children have stopped speaking in Kannada. And then, there are these groups and fundamental groups which then take on this and get on to a certain mode. So they kind of put the government is at gunpoint to do some things. And so these are the ways in which they placate some of these groups. Now, so the way is to really do it in this manner, in when it's not so rigid. When, for instance, children get to speak Kannada and they're able to use that outside. So this is going to die down. So this mandatoriness will not come in. And in fact, the policy also is talking on similar lines. And it is saying that at least 2 Indian languages, which you should be able to clear a basic assessment, is the kind of learning that is required, and not the way that it is done today in terms of the assessments. And it can be any 2 Indian languages is what the policy is saying. And so there is a long way to go. NCERT will have to take this up. Assessment reforms will have to happen. So there is in the policy this thing that assessments are going to become easier. I mean, what it basically is saying is that it's not going to be focused on some very, very rigid parameters. And and that's how, for instance, the policy talks of at grade 6 a few more foreign languages coming in. And as long as that can be cleared in an assessment that is going to come up, and the assessments are going to be of different kinds, right? And now one moment you move into the secondary school, for instance, it's a credit based system that the policy envisages, and so assessments could be happening at different levels at different points of time. And so that is where I would see, for instance, for the homeschoolers, the open boards are going to come in a big way. RTE, for good reasons, then had said that the only way schooling can be done is, with this prescribed norms if a school is established. And so that is kind of, eased through the policy measures. And even though it's a policy, this is going to come about. And I think you are going to have someone speak from the National Institute of Open Schooling. So what the policy is suggesting is that all these open boards will have to start offering a lot more assessments, so that even as homeschooler, you as a parent would know as to, what is it that your child knows in terms of some of the benchmarks and standards that exist. And so you take these assessments to just help you work out a plan for your child, right? So I'm sure the NIOS person is going to talk about as to what they're already thinking. But one of the things that the policy is pushing them to do is start offering assessments at different levels, so that homeschoolers benefit from it. Because the basic principle that is guiding all this is multiple pathways to learning. That's the foundational principle for the policy. And then that's where there is a move away from RTE, which had prescribed certain things. Of course, we had this huge issue of people or children being out of school, and that was what was being attempted. But in that, the homeschoolers and alternative schools kind of got impacted.
So yes, I would like to add on that, because this was just around the time that we had started homeschooling. So we did write to the minister at that time, Kapil Sibal, and he had written back. I have a copy of it somewhere that I can hunt. He did say, you are not the targeted group at all. We do understand, and you are free to do. You are the privileged niche group. You are free to do what you want as long as you are educating your children. So as you said, multiple learning pathways was what they were looking at, but they were trying to get the out of school other children, the other group that was being, I wouldn't say targeted is the wrong word, but the group that they were trying to support to get back to school so that they get a better chance or opportunity at education. So then we were fine on that. But the assessment methods, yes. And as you said, my understanding is if these assessment methods needs to change, there's going to be change from many angles and many areas. I don't know if it's going to be top, bottom. I'm not that expert here, but I'm sure somebody's going to come up with what needs to be done on that. And since you mentioned NIOS also, this is your opinion, if you could. There's a question here that asks, is there any positive change added as part of new NEP in the NIOS curriculum?
So yeah, so what NEP, the other thing that it does is that there are these agencies, they are best placed to make the changes, right? It's giving a broader framework in terms of which way or in which direction they have to move to reform themselves. So NIOS, in fact, has been given this now liberty and to go about doing offering assessments at various levels and across many more subjects, rather than what they have. In fact, NIOS anyways have a larger portfolio than a regular board, I would think. But then along with that, there are the state boards that are being pushed, state open boards that are being pushed to start offering. So there is this clear indication, and the central government apparently has already started motivating not just NIOs but the state boards also to kind of start reforming themselves in terms of the way they do assessments, the portfolio itself, and all this is also going to tie up into the assessment reforms itself that's taking place. You would have read about the Parak, which the policy is talking about. Now, there is a lot of funding that is coming in. You must have read a couple of days ago the World Bank funding that is coming in. A lot of it is going into the assessment reforms. The National Testing Agency has already been established. Now, there is a whole lot of change that they will have to bring about in terms of how they go about doing even these entrance exams, right? So once the national bodies start revising the patterns of assessments, that is when you will start seeing that percolate downwards. But then there are some states also which will start doing it. Again, there is this flexibility. Now, it all depends on what is it and who is it that are helping out these states to kind of use all this flexibility that exists to bring about these changes and reforms. See, it's all again towards what is it that we want our children to be equipping themselves with in this 21st century uncertain world, right? Because if we do education the way we currently do in the mainstream, then we all know that we are headed towards a disaster, right? We have now our higher education GER is just about 26%. I mean, of course, you have states like Tamil Nadu, which is 50% almost, but which basically means 75% of our youth are not even getting into colleges. And in spite of that, our unemployment rates are that high. Now, imagine if we continue with the same mode of education and we have, like, as the policy itself wants, 50% GER in higher education, you can imagine as to how, what kind of people we will have after 23 years of education if we continue this. So everything will have to change, and assessment patterns hence will have to change. And with that, once you change the way system is working in providing the kinds of skill sets that are required, that is when probably we'll be slightly better off, because then these are children who will, or students who will come out of our system, will be able to adapt very quickly to this very quick changes, uncertain changes. They are the ones who would be able to create employment rather than only look for employment, because today we know that that's the case, right? Everyone who comes out of our undergrad courses are looking for employment, and there no society can create so much of employment. So it will have to. So these are the changes that are, in fact, we've reached a stage wherein it must happen. Otherwise, 10-15 years down the line, we are staring at something which is very scary to even imagine.
Yes, on that note, I'm also unsure, because we have various boards also associated with, as you said, even everybody wants to get into a private school. A government school is not something that parents would want their children. Even from the lower economical group, they do think that an English medium private school would give them a better opportunity. And then there are the boards also to think of. I do remember a mention of a unified curriculum in between, and the policy says about changing the mode of assessment. Would that also go for the various boards that we already have, like the ICSE and the CBSE? That is common across the country, while the state boards are very different. Do you think each state would have different assessment forms? Let's say Kerala decides to go on the suggestion given in the policy on how to assess, and the Karnataka still thinks of following the earlier mode. Wouldn't that be affecting, or is there going to be a centralized? I know about Parak that you mentioned, but is that going to be a mandate that every state follows a similar assessment pattern, including the boards?
Yeah, so there is some equivalence of the boards that the policy says that should be attained, but then that's again because there are some boards which have really fallen far below what, let's say, a Kerala board or even a Karnataka board is. And then of course you have the CBSE, which is for many states even today aspirational, and many states hence are moving towards a CBSE kind of model by themselves. For instance, Karnataka has already started looking at the NCERT textbooks as the ones that would be used in Karnataka schools. In fact, early years they've already started making those as the bilingual text. So a lot of movement was that since the time that we've had RTE, because RTE mandates that all states evolve state curricular frameworks based on National Curriculum Framework 2005. Right, so there is this actually a legal mandate on the states that state curriculum frameworks have to be evolved based on NCF 2005. So that is continuing in this policy. It continues and says that NCF 2021 would be the framework based on which the states are expected to move on those lines. So the boards, if it is done the way the policy is envisaging, I see that pretty much all boards becoming similar in terms of what they're offering. Now, in reality, how much that could happen or will happen, we don't know. But then that is the way in which the policy at least is pushing, saying that, the boards can set standards and, move in there, but then they will have to be similar in the offering. They can't, be too very different. And also with this NTA coming in to offer assessments for the secondary courses, secondary school or the high school courses, then in some sense, the board exams are going to become redundant. Because if it's the NTA scores that are going to be taken by at least the higher education institutions in our country, then what value is the board exam? Why would you want to sit for your 10th or the 12th, right? So currently they will continue, but then moment you move completely into the credit-based system and taking NTA assessments as and when you are ready for it, and the higher education institutions start looking at the NTA credits for their admissions, then the board exams will become redundant. Then what do the boards do? Then the boards will be setting standards and saying that, okay, we will give you this kind of assistance if your school is, a part of our board. But then in an idealistic situation, what it entails is that a school can be part of multiple boards. And you could have in a school in grade 12, a few students, let's say, taking the ICSE, a few students taking the IB, a few students, not doing anything, but just doing the NTA assessment. So, but then why would you do a ICSE, CBSE? Now, the question is as to who is it then, who would be using that, right? So these are all the way which is very, very open in which it can move. Yeah.
For parents like me and educators like me, that sounds very promising, but you never know unless it is being implemented, if at all, it would be great because it does give each child the individual learning path that is required for that particular child, and to be able to take up the exam at their own pace, at their own level, which also leads again to teacher training and the people in that system. Any thoughts on this, Mr. Vishwanath? In general, I know you work with the early years maybe, and that's where you would like to talk about, but any more?
In many ways, we have already been moving in the direction of common testing through subterfuge. Subterfuge means whether it's NEET or whether it is JEE or all of these other things. And as Rishikesh said, which is the assessment that I am going to accept as a higher education institution, the moment that I have freedom to determine that. Obviously, with whether we like it or not, privatization of education continues to grow. And especially in higher education, I think that the investments cannot keep pace with the demand by a long shot. So which means that you will actually have even more, for good or bad, you will have even more private institutions. And so the decision actually moves away from the hands of the states, not by legislation, but by default in some form or the other. And really, I think we have to also to be honest a little bit here, is that we fear these things much more than they have actually affected us. Even in the past, I don't think that we have been constrained by, whether this state board, because many of us went to state boards. CBSE and ICSE were not as common as they are today. And even at that time, the same situation existed. And we all find ways to negotiate these situations. And this has actually never been a bugbear. At the end of the day, what are we looking at? What is the skill level that you have, and whatever it is that you're doing, and that is where everything eventually converges. And your real test really is, once you are 3 or 4 years in the industry, or in whatever vocation that you choose to be in, what your path possibly is. Of course, certain labels get you a certain advantage in terms of the entry point, but beyond that, once again, you have to chart your own course, and your skills are going to be tested at that point, if not at an earlier stage. And once again, as with the societies which are more advanced than us, once this demand and supply gap also in terms of aspirational institutes or whatever it is, that gap reduces, I think the anxiety around which board, what marks, all of these things will also disappear, quite quickly. NEP is only accelerating that process. I don't see. I think the reason for anxiety is only going to be lower and not higher.
Thank you, Mr. Vishwanath. For me, it is still a wait and watch what happens, because there have been previous policies, parts of which have been implemented, parts which are still have come into the new policy as well. We never know. And
parts that you've gotten away with. So we also know
yes.
how to work our way around these things.
Right. So I think on a note to parents, there's nothing to be worried about right now. And even if it is being implemented, it's going to be done in phases, and you're going to know about it. I think it's also a lot more parents getting to know. The previous policies didn't get as much of a hype or a discussion, because it was discussed only among policymakers or educators, and not really the parents. Now the parents got a little worked up on all of this, and we could go on about this topic, an interesting one, but due to lack of time, we will have to wind down right now. Bangalore Schools as a group, we do encourage a lot of discussions and topics such as this, so that parents are also aware and start thinking. As you just said, unless the demand or the mindset of the parent starts changing, we cannot move faster to this NEP and what changes we need to be done. The more there is resistance from somewhere, after a point, this just falls off. So looking forward to more and more discussions, maybe, and hopefully making the right kind of change due to these discussions, moving to the right direction. I'd like to wind up this, and thank you, Mr. Vishwanath, and thank you so much, Rishikesh, for once again coming into a group. And so we will, because we have another storytelling session in another half an hour. And thank you, audience, everybody who is here, and see you at the storytelling session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sandhya. See you, Mr. Vishwanathan. Pleasure.
See you.